My name is Henry Wingfield. I'm a junior at the University of the South, and I've had the privilege of spending my summer here at the Seattle Science Foundation doing some fantastic work. And with that, let's get started into the presentation. So the title of my presentation is Body Donation Today, a critical comparison of two current practices and moving into the future. So the two current practices that I will be examining today are the willed/whole body programs that are in the United States, and this is all completely in the United States, by the way. And I'll also be comparing that against the private vendors that supply anatomic material to institutions such as this one. The modes of comparison that I'll be using, I'll be comparing them. Well, first I'll be providing a general overview of both, and then I'll be comparing them along three lines of their logistics that goes into each. The screening that takes place for every potential donor upon the death of the donor, what has to go into the transporting of the donor, and what costs are incurred by the organization employing the respective method, and finally what costs are incurred and what methods are used for proper and respectful disposal in ways that respect the incredible gift that these donors gave. And then ultimately, I will be giving a recommendation based upon the most practical program to implement in the average anatomical institution. And before I start, I'd like to say there will be no ethical arguments made, and this is purely about business, like a business perspective. Excuse me. And additionally, I will be using information from specific companies, but I will keep them anonymous, and I will not be using any names. All right. So. Body donation, cadavers, as everyone in this room knows, are essential in medicine for education, research, developing new technologies. I don't need to really go over that too much with y'all, but they're crucial, and there's also extra demand placed on human tissue through organ donations that save lives. So understandably, there's quite a high demand for tissue, cadaveric materials. So how do these institutions meet the demand? Well, the first one is a willed body program. Generally, these are housed at universities that are either large state universities with big hospitals, or private universities with very, very large endowments, and also they all have our own hospitals, but they're generally very well funded and well-established institutions that house these willed body programs. And essentially, these willed body programs, they have their own database of donors, and they operate within generally a certain radius of their institution. Some even use like state residency as a disqualifying factor. And they each, according to an article in Clinical Anatomy by Thomas Champney, he says that each one faces a varying level of regulation, some with just individual oversight, and some face state anatomical board oversight. So moving farther along. So the willed body donation process, as I said before, they have people who previously, ahead of time, almost all the time. There's some instances where you can have a family member donate your body after death, but generally they're in their database beforehand, have done all the legal paperwork for it, and are registered. And upon death, these willed body programs must be notified within a certain amount of time after death, and the times ranging needed for the specimen to arrive at the institution ranges from 12 to 72 hours from what I saw. Each one is different. So once the institution is notified, these will body programs need to have a system in place for 24-hour, 7-day-a-week communication, because death waits for no one, and they need to conduct screenings to determine the acceptability of the donors. What they screen for, as you can see, has some pretty significant variations, but there are some common ones. Like for safety issues, everyone does not accept HIV, hepatitis. I'm sorry, I forgot to mention this earlier. This is information I gathered myself just going through the websites of and the brochures of these willed body programs and seeing like what parameters they use. So this is out of 40 institutions I found. So 100% screen for infectious diseases. And another common one are involving the actual condition of the specimen, obesity, or previous donation of organs, or mutilation due to trauma. And then there's some that are probably more geared to a specific need of an institution, such as Alzheimer's disease. So assuming they pass the screening for they pass through the stage, then there's the question of transport. This actually the number was actually 72.5. I don't know why the chart did that, but 72.5% of those 40 institutions provided transportation within a reasonable distance from their facilities, while only 27.5% in every single case put the burden on the estate of the donor's family. After the specimen has fulfilled the purpose to the institute in question, there's then the question of proper disposal. I hate to use the word disposal when talking about human remains, but for the purpose of this slideshow, we're going to go with that. This is actually a picture from the University of Hawaii. What they do is really cool. They actually go out into canoes in the ocean and spread the ashes out there. I just thought that was neat. So these disposal ceremonies range from something as elaborate as that to some cases where they simply cremate the ashes and then inter them in a local cemetery unless other arrangements have been made with the next of kin. But according to an article in Clinical Anatomy titled Body Donations Today and Tomorrow, What is the Best Practice and Why, by Beat Ryder, 95.5% of all human anatomy programs in the United States provide some sort of memorial service. So some additional constraints they face that I've noticed is if you're running a willed body program, you're adding a large amount of legal liability to running your organization, because at every step of the way you are responsible instead of having another company doing that for you. And there's actually been cases where this has not worked out well for certain organizations. In the Western Journal of Medicine, there was an account of the University of California at Irvine in the 1990s suffering from a major scandal after an audit revealed that the institution lacked supervision, kept poor records of their donors, had financial irregularities, and repeatedly failed to return the remains to the families after those arrangements had been made. And even worse, the auditors had found that 320 of the 441 cadavers donated from 1995 to 1999 were completely unaccounted for in their records. And as a result of this scandal, the University of California, Irvine was hit with numerous lawsuits. As this should be noted that this is an extreme case of everything possibly going wrong, but this is just a good example of like how the liability can fall upon your shoulders, even if it's one person in the entire organization messing up. And so that's before I go into the next phase, when I discuss the private companies, I should discuss the legal and regulatory status of anatomic donations in human, basically tissue material. So it is presently illegal to make a profit off of organ donations, but you can profit off of bone, sperm, blood, hair, and ova. And you can also charge within reason for the processing, transportation, preservation, if that's if the company you're receiving from preserves, and I said processing, and delivery of that. So they're going to charge for that, but they will not charge for for the actual human body, and they all state their strict compliance with the law on all their websites. And as far as the law is concerned, they are operating, as it seems, within the boundaries of the law. Each state has its own different regulation, and oftentimes the law is unclear, but that's the way it is right now. So the private companies. So there's as I've researched multiple companies. I'm not going to name them for privacy purposes. But essentially, some of these range in size. Some of them are all across the United States. Some of them are more regionally based. And they provide the services that a willed body program would provide, only that you're paying them to do that for you, and so that you can maintain a smaller staff. And I'll get more into that as we move along. So the body donation process for a private company, if you're a donor going through there, it's pretty much the same. There's some variations here and there. With screening, they were obviously still looking for HIV, still looking for the general stuff. Not so much like the specific things like like Alzheimer's and stuff like that. They're just trying to get stuff to serve a larger group of clients. There were one or two anomalies. Like for example, one company does not want to take homeless, prolonged incarcerated, or institutionalized. They didn't provide a further explanation beyond that, so I can't begin to speculate upon it. But there's some clear historical implications beyond good body donation practices. You can come to your own conclusions on that, why they do that. So transport, they provide it as again they pay with the private companies. The donor does not have to pay a dime in any case generally. And with transport, these private companies actually have better transport capabilities than the willed body programs, because they have more resources in a lot of cases if they're a private company. In some cases, some universities have quite a bit of money, but they most willed body programs are confined within their certain region, whereas one company in particular was operating in all but 3 states, delivering cadaveric material, and that ultimately factors in the cost that the institution like this would pay one of those companies. Disposal is more simple with these companies. They do not provide memorial services, but they will return the cremated remains to the family within a certain period of time once they've fulfilled their purpose, and they handle the disposal, the proper disposal for the institutions. Again, that's another load off of the shoulders of a smaller institution. So which institution is the best? Which one is the best for an institution to employ? Well, for the average, while it's clear to me that if you can operate at far less support staff outside of the actual laboratories, you can operate a much more less lower day-to-day operational costs, not having to have a 24-hour phone line, not having to contract with someone for transportation or provide it yourself, not having to do your own disposal, and what you pay for they charge you up front for the transport and all that. But that being said, these universities that do have willed body programs, their budgets are so big generally that that compared to them, it's not that significant. But for average institutions, it's fairly significant, and it's money that could have been spent on the actual purpose of the institution, teaching future doctors, making medical advancements, and whatnot. And additionally, if you're working with the private company, you aren't incurring as much of the liability as you would if you were operating it yourself. And that's a big bonus because, as I mentioned before, for most institutions, years of legal battles, a bad verdict, or legal fees would run them into financial ruin. And additionally, for an institution that is relying off of altruistic donations, if they have the bad publicity hit them, people are not going to want to donate to them. And if they're not getting donations, they're not working in the lab making advancements. And it's kind of like a jockey without a horse. So world body programs and private companies moving forward, I think, assuming both are still prevalent down the road, I still stand by. I think private companies are better for the average institution, but I think the will body programs, if a smaller institution were to try and implement, or if someone wanted to operate at a lower cost, there are some things I think they could cut. I think that they could cut transportation and completely put that on the estate of the family. I think they could outsource their phone lines or make them find a way to make them automated. I think that's more difficult considering the nature of the calls, and I'm also not sure if you can have someone outside the institution having those phone calls for confidentiality. But that's an interesting thought. And additionally, the memorial services, those also, if you cut those out and just return still as respectful as possible, but return those to the family without the service. But however, people's altruism has limits, and if you start putting those burdens on the donor's estate, people are going to be less liable to donate to the will body programs and more liable to donate to the private company guys. So there's only so much you'd be able to get away with there. But for it to be viable for an average institution, they would have to find a way to keep the cost of operating it at a minimum. For example, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the average phone operator in a hospital, or where most of these institutions are housed, get an annual salary of $33,000, and I'm assuming you have more than one for the entire 24 hours. That really begins to add up. Additionally, the cremation services are not cheap all the time. I was not able to find a 100% reputable source. I saw some people say cremations average $500, which seems low to me, and one that said $3,200, which seemed high to me. So, between $1,000 and $3,000, it could range from there. It's still something that would add up if you're providing crematory services to these families. So, find ways to cut back without taking away too much would be something someone could consider. And with private companies moving forward, I think that in the future there should be, I think, an interesting avenue to explore is less stigma on the sale these type of companies. And I think there's been a debate in the organ donation community about legalizing the actual sales and creating markets for these organs. And I think something interesting to explore is for these cadavers, as long as you're above board with the people that are doing that, like that's what it's sold for, they get the money. I think it's an interesting way for to move forward. And at the very least, it would also start a dialogue in which these companies could demonstrate that by and large we are providing a good service to these institutions, and we are operating within the boundaries of the law, and this the stigma around us is impedes us, and I think that could help body donations in the future with them. Again, the conclusion. So while a will body program cuts out the middleman that would be a private vendor, it puts you in direct contact with with the donors, and you have you know exactly where they're coming from, who they are, their history, everything. I'm sure you get the same for private companies, but it's I guess it's your own data. That's really the only merit, business merit I found of it, because you're spending so much extra money on each of these extra steps that could be easily provided by a company at a much lower cost. And this is money that could be spent on teaching the doctors tomorrow to save lives, or making medical devices that will save lives, or helping doctors have a safe place to practice new procedures. So yeah, that's private suppliers provide everything that Will Body Program does, while still allowing organizations to keep their operational costs at a minimum. And a special thanks to the University of South for funding my time here in Seattle, and the Seattle Science Foundation for giving me the incredible opportunity to present here today and spend my summer here this summer, and just learn a lot. Thank you very much.